Հանրաճանաչ վիրաբույժ բժիշկ Ջան Վարդանյանը մասնագիտացել է դեմքի գեղագիտական վիրաբուժության մարզում։ Նրա շքեղ գրասենյակը արդիական սարքերով ծառայում է իր հաճախորդներին, նրանց դեմքերին տալով բնական արդյունքներ։ Վարկավորված բժիշկ Վարդանյանը ուսուցանում է UCLA-ում եւ USC-ում։ Նրա մասնագիտությունը ընդգրկում է քթի եւ կոպերի վիրաբուժություն, դեմքի վերաթարմացում, ճառագայթային գործողություններ եւ վարսատնկում։ Զանգահարեք մեզ վիրաբուժական կամ այլ սպասարկությունների ցանկի համար։
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Your Health TV program, which is brought to you by the Armenian American Medical Society. My name is Dr. Vicken Sepilian, your host, and tonight we have with us Dr. Jane Mahakian. Dr. Mahakian, welcome to our program.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sepilian. It's a pleasure to be here this evening.
Of course, thank you. And Dr. Mahakian, as many of you know, is a gerontologist with over 30 years of experience. She specializes in taking care of individuals with Alzheimer's disease and other cognitive impairments. She's the founder of Alzheimer's Care Armenia, a nonprofit delivering innovation and sustainable care solutions in Armenia. In collaboration with the Armenian American Medical Society, Dr. Mahakian has led pioneering initiatives from using semi-autonomous robots to combat elder loneliness to launching Armenia's first national dementia plan. Her most recent work includes a nationwide memory screening project reaching over 4,500 individuals and is expanding in-home cognitive and palliative care services across the country. Again, Dr. Mahakian, we're very thankful of all the work that you're doing for Armenia. And today I wanted to invite you to our program to discuss some of the things that you specialize in. I want to talk about some of the red flags when an elder may need help at home, and how should the family go about doing it. Let me start by asking you, can you talk a little bit about the red flags? What are these signs that an older person may exhibit that should trigger a loved one or a caretaker or family member that says, oh, is it time that we need some sort of an intervention or help at home?
Sure. Happy to do so. You know, whether the person lives locally, or many times, I'll receive calls with the parent living on the East Coast and the children are here on the West Coast. And they call my office and they say, my mom or my dad, they sound great on the phone. But when I visited them over Easter, I was quite surprised to see that things were not as good as they sounded on the telephone, which is very common. In educating people, it's important to know what to look for. What are those red flags and what are those signs that your loved one needs some extra help at home? Most of us want to stay at home. We want to stay at home forever. Most of us do not move to community type living if we can prevent it. So the goal is to stay at home and to live as independently as possible. But what are some of those red flags, as is important to look for, is things such as wearing the same outfit several days in a row, or even more than that, 3 or 4 or 5 days, not changing their clothes, forgetting to take their medications. So many times you'll see that they say they've taken their medication, but they really haven't. There's also fiduciary and financial confusion. Withdrawing large sums of money out of the bank and then not being able to account for it. When the daughter or the son visits the home, the mail, many times mail is not opened or piled up high, and bills may not be paid, or sometimes the person will pay the bill twice. So these are some red flags. Other red flags are, saying that they took a shower that morning, but they haven't showered in quite some time. The person may leave the stove on. They may not, have fresh food in their home, even though they say they did have their lunch or their breakfast.
Mhm.
So it's
And
all
how,
about safety, you know?
of course, and how should a family member approach this if they see any of these red flags or
Mm.
signs that you are discussing? How do we
Yeah,
go about, approaching our family member
yeah,
uh,
sure.
for an explanation, or how do you approach it?
Sure. Good question. Good question, Dr. Sepilian. How you really want to approach it is you want to take some notes. You want to be able to be real clear on what you're seeing. Is this a one-time thing that, the person left the stove on? Or is this something that's continuing to happen? You want to be able to sit down with your parent or grandparent and talk about what their experience has been and what they're seeing that they may need help with. More than likely, that person is going to say they don't need help at home. Very few of my patients admit that they need some help at home. So how do you do that? And how do you know when it's time? Well, those
Mhm.
red flags are things that will alert you that it's time to bring in some extra help at home. You want to keep your loved ones safe at home, and you want to be able to also monitor what goes on, if especially when they're living by themselves, whether it's they're a couple or you have your mom or your dad living alone. You want to get a sense of really what goes on, and one of the things that you can do is take a look at the refrigerator. Now,
Mhm.
why do I mention this is, and I tell my interns this, I have interns from USC every year that join me and want to train to be a gerontologist as also care manager, is the refrigerator tells us a lot of what's going on with that person. Are the foods not fresh? Is the food, shouldn't, completely um, not edible? Uh, I'll tell you a story. Is 2 weeks ago, I went to visit a couple here locally in Orange County, and the couple, all they had in the refrigerator was a bag of carrots.
Mhm.
Literally, there was no other food in the home. And the niece, who lives nearby, had no idea that this is what has been going on. There's been a sharp decline cognitively in both the mother and the father, and the niece wasn't aware of that. Um, Losing car keys is losing items in the home is one of the clear signs that it's time that there's something going on and could very well be cognitive changes.
Of course. And now you said it may be time to have a caregiver. And if a family is experiencing this, is finding out that, yes, their loved one has a decline, how do they approach in finding the proper caregiver?
Hmm. That's a good question. That's a very good question, and it depends upon where you live too. So Los Angeles and Orange County, they're very rich in resources. There's no doubt about that. What I suggest you do is to have a conversation first with their primary care physician and see if they have recommendations for agencies that they like. You can also contact, a care manager or someone like myself and who can give you those type of resources. It's very important to when you're assessing an agency-based caregiver, um, to properly interview that caregiver. You can also look for caregivers from friends or family members. So reaching out to friends who may have used, a caregiver for their parent or their aunt or uncle and see if you can get a recommendation that way because you have some idea of how, how this person has performed and some recommendation to back up their work. Caregivers from agencies, you definitely, whether they're private duty caregiver or a caregiver from an agency, you want to be able to have them explain what their work history is and explore with them, ask them questions such as, what qualities do you have that make a good caregiver? What do you think is a good caregiver, what kind of qualities does a good caregiver have? And what kind of skills should a good caregiver have? And the caregiver will give you an idea of what skills they think are important. Another question I always ask is, how do you deal with difficult clients? The client that says, I don't want to take my medication, or I've already had a shower today. I don't want to take a shower. And even though they haven't had a shower for 3 or 4 days, or maybe even longer, how do you deal with the resistance? And how does that caregiver handle any kind of agitation or sometimes even aggression when the person doesn't want to do something?
And how do you approach this sensitive matter when the loved one or the family person is refusing to have a caregiver? They may think, hey, I don't need a caregiver. I can do everything. There's nothing wrong here. How do you approach that situation?
Yeah. So that is a very carefully crafted approach, and every approach is going to be different, as you can imagine. The person that has an Alzheimer's disease or any other kind of dementia, you can kind of use what I call like therapeutic fibbing, right? So validating that person's reality that he or she really doesn't need care, but let's say it's a husband and wife, and the wife has Alzheimer's disease, and the husband's been caring for his wife. Well, the caregiver would be presented as somebody that will support the husband, not the wife, not the person that needs the help. Because you don't want to create a situation where that person's going to become resistant and say, I don't need a caregiver, because they really don't need one. They believe they don't need one. So every person is going to be a little bit different. For the parent or the loved one who is cognitively fine, but they are a high fall risk, and they keep, you want to keep them safe with some care, some care at home. So you can say things like, Mom, this is really more for me. I have not been sleeping at night, and I'm really worried about you. And can we just try it for a few days? So presenting it in a way that's temporary is probably a very good idea. For the person that has a dementia, presenting it again as something temporary is a good idea. And also the fact, more than likely, they're not going to know the sense of time. So they're going to have some confusion, more than likely. If they're needing a caregiver at home, they reach that stage that they need that extra careful eye looking out for them. And so it's perfectly okay to say it's temporary, but the person continues to work. I think too, everybody, as all of our brains are different, the approach is going to be a little bit fine-tuned and different for each person.
Of course, yeah, it's never a one size fits all. And I'd like to actually take that segue into my next question. With you having this depth of experience here in Southern California, as well as in Armenia now, have you noticed nuanced differences, cultural differences on how, let's say, an Armenian family should approach this compared to from a cultural perspective compared to a non-Armenian family?
Sure. That's good. What we've noticed is, and here also, the Armenian family wants to care for their parent in their own home. Many times in Armenia, more times than not, that parent is living with the children or the in-laws. Yeah, here in Los Angeles, there are many, I do receive calls from children who say, my parents are in Glendale and they want to remain in their own home, but they're refusing a caregiver. What can we do? Many of the Armenians, whether they're from Armenia or they're American Armenians or from Iran or Beirut, many of them live independently and their children live nearby, or they also live, we want to care for our elders. We care for our elders in our homes, or we sometimes move into their homes too. I've seen that.
Mm.
Versus the, American culture is the very quick to perhaps have that person live in a retirement home.
Mm.
Many times the parents do not want, the children to be involved or to take care of them. They want to be independent in a retirement home or assisted living community. But
Right.
then again, there's also the Armenian families, both in Armenia and here, who say, my mom, my dad has Alzheimer's. And the caregiver, they've outgrown their home and the caregiver cannot manage them by themselves. And even with my help, it's not making a difference because the parent has a very difficult dementia and the behaviors are increasingly becoming difficult. So what are my options for memory care communities in Los Angeles or San Francisco? Recently, I helped a family up there in the Bay Area, decide what's the best option for caring for the father who was aggressive with the caregivers at
Mm.
home. And so many times, it's that person may outgrow the home and they need more of a team approach.
Mhm. Yes, of course. The time and the symptoms and the situation may end up warranting something that has to be outside of the house. And while, in our culture, we do try to hold on and maintain control to the extent
Mm-hmm.
possible. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it is just the best for everybody involved, including that patient, for them to be in a facility that has all the tools to best
Mm-hmm.
care for them.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. You can't replicate a really good memory care community's activity program, for example, at home. You may have a caregiver who has some good skill set on activities and keeping that person busy, but ultimately that person that has a dementia needs a schedule and they need a daily routine and predictability in their day. So that will help decrease some of the confusion, and it also gives them a sense of safety
Mhm.
because of predictability and a daily schedule. The person knows what is coming next when they're handed that schedule. And it becomes a sense of safety for them. And you can do the same kind of, I have patients who are living at home, whether they're Armenian or non-Armenian. And I tell those families, create a daily schedule. So when they get up in the morning, they know what's ahead and things to look forward to. It could be spending time with grandchildren or, going to a park. It could be making, their favorite dish together. Those are things that would be put on the schedule. We do the same kind of work. We have an in-home cognitive rehabilitation program now in Armenia with our team in Armenia, and we do the same thing there. The families are taught how to create a schedule and who can roll that schedule out. Sometimes we have the grandchildren coming by the home and
Mhm.
helping with that after school. So from 3 o'clock to 6 o'clock, that grandchild who's 15 years old is helping with grandma. And while mom then comes home, and then mom takes over, you know, after her work. But so it's all about education and training them. Really, how is it best to manage this person and give them a sense of independence all the while, right? So
course.
the grandma may not be able to, properly prepare her favorite cake anymore, but with support, she can do that. And that's really what you want to do, is elevate that person's capabilities. It's kind of focusing, Dr. Sepilian, on what the person can do, not
Mhm.
focusing on what they can't do anymore.
Of course, and that's
Mm.
very important. Dr. Mahakian, we have maybe about 7 or 8 minutes left, and I'd like to talk a little bit about, the foundation and its work in Armenia. How did you get started, and what caught your interest in doing that in Armenia? And perhaps if you can tell us a little bit how that work has progressed.
Oh, I'm certainly happy to. Thank you. You know, it's really not work. It's really, what should we say, a labor of love, right? It started with my own, grandparents. My grandparents were my best friends growing up, and both of my grandparents had a dementia. And it was out of my just passion for finding my roots, connecting back with my homeland at the very young age of 21. I went to Armenia, and from there, I saw that there was as I took off in my career and things, that there was a great need for and a gap in care, in services for the older person, and the older person that had a cognitive impairment in Armenia. So our Alzheimer's Care Armenia was founded in 2017 to develop sustainable programs and services and initiatives that would help shape the whole country.
Mhm.
2018, we partnered with a national memory care community to launch the first Alzheimer's disease conference for physicians and psychologists and social workers and nurses. And from there, it's just basically the need is so great that we really can't, we're keeping up as much as we can. And we've developed Armenia's first memory cafes and memory
Mhm.
clubs. And we've partnered in the past with Oran and Vanadzor to develop a memory club in Armenia. We have developed the in-home cognitive rehabilitation program, as well as launched with the Armenian Eye Care Project, the early detection memory screening and Alzheimer's disease training program 2 years ago, which was a huge success in screening over 4,500 people for memory. And then we most recently developed a support cafe for ARTSOC elders, which was very successful, funded, of course, by the AGBU, and which continues to this day to provide this type of mental health support for the ARTSOC elder. Our memory cafes are bursting with joy, and bursting with joy with long waiting lists. So now our local work group here in Los Angeles is developing a healthy aging center, which will be in cooperation with the Ministry of Health, which I'm happy to say. The Ministry of Health will provide the space, and we need to provide everything else, but we're excited. It'll be the country's first Alzheimer's daycare program
Mm.
in Amavir, and providing care for 60 to 80 older adults every week. This will be an important center for us, as we're going to use it as a training site for diasporan physicians coming over to train the physician as well as psychologist in Armenia, as well as provide ongoing memory screening and really more what we're launching is neuropsychological testing also within the center. So there's so much more work to do. We welcome volunteers and support to really, continue the growth that we have successfully been able to do in a very short amount of time. So thank
Yes.
you. Thank you very much for inviting me here this evening, and it's a pleasure.
Of course, thank you for, being here and sharing your expertise. It's, of course, as you know, it's very important. Many of our viewers are contending, many of us in general are contending or will contend at some point with the cognitive decline that is, certain to impact us or our family members. And it's always important to refresh our memories or learn the latest that there is in approaching these types of inevitable issues. And Dr. Mahakian, I'm very thankful not only of somebody like you who's willing to come and share their knowledge to our viewers, but also actually doing the work actively in our communities locally, and as well as our communities in our homelands, where sometimes these types of issues could be taboo. And with the tools and the knowledge that you have truly made these types of approaches and strategies welcomed in our homelands. And, we really commend you for all that you've done.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. There's no doubt, Alzheimer's touches all of our lives, and it is increasing. So people can feel free to reach out to us. You simply go to the website of Alzheimer's Care Armenia, and we're happy to help both here as well as in Armenia.
Of course. Thank you, Dr. Mahakian. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us this evening. We will get together again in 2 weeks. Until we see you then, please stay healthy and good night.